lecture finds you well. I am going to try and continue to look at the foundations of the social science. So this lecture really is, I suppose, the last of these sort of introduction to the social sciences and the philosophy of the social sciences. I hope you're getting somewhat of a grasp around them. These couple of lectures and the video I've included will hopefully get your head around it if you wouldn't have been as familiar with it as before. So, like I said, the aim of this section of the lectures for this week is to continue to explain the foundations of social science, okay? So, what have we looked at so far? So far in those first sections of lectures last week, we looked at what this module will cover. We begun to look at where the study of the social sciences originated. So if you remember, it was the debate we had the natural sciences there, and then we began to look at where the study of the social sciences began to emerge, and the different debates around it. How should that look? How should we think about it? How should we think about studying people and society? Should we be thinking about doing that? And we had names such as Comte and Popper that were involved in those debates, okay? And they had different views on how we should do that, why we should do that, what it should entail, okay? And we began to look at the concepts of ontology and epistemology, if you remember. So ontology, very simply put, is, so what is there? What do we see? What is our ontological perspective? What do we believe exists and what is reality? And then epistemology looks at, well, if we look at what is there, how do we know it's there? How do we gather knowledge? These concepts, as I was saying in the last lecture, are going to come to the fore more so in regard to your research. But at the moment, it's just good to have that background of knowledge behind you as you begin to try to unravel concepts around youth work and within sociology itself. So when you're talking about, what's my ontological perspective on youth work? What's my epistemological perspective within youth work? And you'll have possibly different epistemological perspectives in different contexts, So, so various positions amongst sociologists, okay? So these various views, stands are ontological, okay? So I think I said in the last lecture that when we're talking about ontological or epistemological, okay, what is there and how do we know this? There's different stands within these. So this is where the debates came from. As I said, different people like Comte and Popper said, well, your ontological perspective, within your ontological perspective, you perceive reality from different standpoints. So I perceive reality from this particular standpoint, or someone else takes a different standpoint, and the same with epistemological standpoints. One person will believe we know what we know because of this, in this way, and another person will believe it from a different particular standpoint. So the four standpoints that we'll be looking at, two come under, I suppose, an ontological position, and two would come under an epistemological position. And you will have heard of these positions before and possibly may not have related them back to, ontological or epistemological. But hopefully after today, after listening to this, you'll be able to link them up a bit better. So the four positions, as I've outlined, are objectivism, constructivism, positivism, and interpretivism. Okay, so we're going to have a look at what each of those are about, and whether they're linked to an ontological perspective. As I'm aware, some of you will know of this already, but just so we're all at that same starting point. Okay, so we'll have a look at it. So objectivism, okay, so this is linked to ontology and your ontological perspective. So when we're talking about objectivism, this is a standpoint you can take. So what do we know? So let's bring it back to when we're talking about ontological, we're standing here. We're standing at a point and we're going, okay, so what do we know? So from an objectivist perspective, you're looking at you're viewing reality as being out there and existing apart from our awareness, okay? That it can be discovered, that it can be measured. So objectivism is often a standpoint that would be linked to the natural sciences. And of course, it can be linked in certain contexts. You can place it under the social sciences, okay? But this is what one of the debates was. So one person was saying, you know what, my ontological standpoint is objectivism. I believe that, you know what, we can stand back and we can study people, and we can be outside the box, I suppose, and that reality is something there that we have to go and try and discover. So if you think of back in the day, anthropologists going to discover new civilizations, or trying to figure out what different cultures were about, and trying to do a study on a particular tribe or something like that. So how could we go in and discover what's there, maybe measure it, try and find it out and discover it. Okay, what's there apart from what we know? So that's one particular standpoint on it, okay? So I'm objectivist. So even yourself, when you say the word objective, okay, I'm objective, I'm standing outside, okay? So that's one particular perspective within ontology, okay? The other comes from the others, the opposite end of that sphere. So if someone is saying, well, we can stand out and we can have reality as separate from our awareness, okay? The other person, the other sociologist, is saying, well, no, I don't believe that's how, that's not my reality. For me, that's not how reality exists. So if they're taking a constructivist perspective, a constructivist standpoint on what reality is, they're looking at, when we're dealing with what we know, there is no objective reality or absolute truth. So we are part of it. We are within it. We don't stand back and go in and try to discover what's there, okay? We are part of it. So we have to try and figure out, our reality. We're in the reality, okay? So like it says here in the second point, that meanings are not fixed, but emerge out of people's interaction with the world. And you can see, if you've studied sociology or done bits of sociology before, people such as Max Weber would have had a constructivist perspective on the world. So, how do we learn? Through interaction, symbolic interaction. What do these symbols mean? Okay, so they emerge out of our interaction with the world. So our reality, in essence, is really what we are part of, what is created within the world, okay? So that's our reality. We don't stand back and look at it, or we don't stand back and study it, but it is, we try and pull out the meanings that are already there, or that are being created within the world that we live in, okay? So third, so we have the two positions within what's the reality, how do we see the world existing, okay? How do we learn about that? So epistemologically, how do we know about that? How do we gather information on that? And this comes back to the standpoint of positivism, okay? So how do we know it, okay? Where does it come from? So positivism, this was initially associated, so going back to, the natural sciences and the social sciences, and we were talking a few minutes ago, just to remind you, about objectivism. And objectivism is often the standpoint that's took within the natural sciences, but obviously again can be took within the social sciences. So take positivism. Positivism are ways of gathering information within science that are often associated with the natural sciences. So if you think about, say, objectivism, what we know, and if we take an objective perspective that we are outside it, positivism, then how do we gather information? How do we gather knowledge? How do we know what we know? Okay, this was initially associated with the natural sciences and advocates the application of the methods of the natural sciences to the study of social reality. Okay, so how can we go in and measure what is there? What sort of methods would we be using? So we're going in, we're going in from a perspective that we can measure things, that things are there to be measured, okay? That we can, often positivistic, if you want to bring it down to what methods might be used, it could be around, measurements, statistics, numbers, which again, all of these have their place at certain times, certain pieces of research, depending on what you're asking, depending on your question. You could be taking a positivistic, epistemological standpoint, okay? So this is where, when you're doing research, you have to figure out what your question is. And then based on your question, you're going to be figuring out what ontological standpoint you're going to be taking. Is it going to be objectivist? Is it going to be constructivist? And then how are you going to gather that information? Is it going to be from an epistemological standpoint of positivism, or is it going to be through this next one, which is interpretivism? Okay, so interpretivism, this, like it says here in this first point, this deviates from the view that we can only use methods from the natural sciences, such as is the case with positivism, okay, to explore and gather knowledge about the social world. There are differences in how we know what we know in the social world, and that encourages us to look for other methods. So again, like I said the last time, thinking outside the box. So when you were talking about interpretivism, this was really essentially thinking outside the box, okay? So how do we look at different methods? How do we create different methods, okay, that look outside the box, okay? So interpretivism did this. So it's predicated upon the view that a strategy is required that respects the differences between people. So again, we're part of society. We can't stand outside. We can't, find methods that try to measure people. That we need to think of how do we figure out methods that between people and the objects of natural sciences, and therefore requires the social sciences to grasp, and that's a really good word, the subjective meaning of social interaction. So how do we gather information on society within society, okay? How do we do that? We're not standing back because we're part of it. So how do we gather knowledge? What sort of things will we be looking at? And that's when you start to bring it down to qualitative research and, interviews and interactions, okay? So that's an interpretivist position on that, okay? So just to finish off, I suppose, I want to just set out what sociological paradigms. These are sort of words that are going to come up over the next few lectures and over your next couple of years doing this MA. So just set out what's a sociological paradigm. It's a set of concepts and thought patterns. It includes theories and research methods, okay? And paradigms are a view of what sociology and science should do and be used for. So particular paradigms, so when you're talking about particular paradigms, okay, there's different ways of viewing the world, okay, and this is what the philosophy of the social sciences are made up of. Then when we talk about theories, these are underneath the paradigms, okay, these are within the paradigms. These involve constructing abstract interpretations that can be used to explain a wide variety of empirical or factual situations. So when you have an epistemological or ontological perspective, what sort of theories come under that? Identifying features which are common to the development of, for example, something like industrialization. Show the importance of the features in trying to explain the development of industrialization. Test theories. Theories help us make sense of facts that we find. Facts and theories go hand in hand to help us make sense of the world, okay? So just have a think about these couple of questions that I've posed here, okay? How did you learn about youth work? How do you learn to become youth workers? Okay? And then have a think of those questions and please attempt the quiz on Moodle which applies to this section. And I'll talk to you again in a couple of minutes.